We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. And I'm still hearing the music in my ears, but that's okay. I'll just do the announcements on top of it. There we go. Hey, Security Weekly is more than happy to announce that we will be at InfoSec World 2021 in person, which will be on October 25th through 27th. This year, our annual partnership with InfoSec World is extra specially different, as we are now both business units under the Cyber Risk Alliance. What does that mean for you? It means you get a discount. So go to securityweekly.com/ISW and you can register and save 20% on the World Pass. It's actually securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 as I scroll down my notes. Also, coming up on June 24th, which is just 2 days from now at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, we will be having our next webinar where you can learn how web application firewalls can help mitigate exposure in a complex threat landscape. Also, join us July 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time to learn how a thoughtful approach to SASE can improve security and enable scalability. You can get to either by visiting securityweekly.com/webcast. And of course, all of our previously recorded webinars and technical trainings are available at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right. We were shifting gears a little bit at the end of the first session, and I want to pick that up again, but I want to kind of just frame it by asking sort of an overarching question, which I think we're sort of alluding to in various ways. So, Casey, just in general, what is your take as a what's that word again?
Psychometrician.
Psychometrician. Why do people that deal with numbers, are they called psycho? That's one question I have. But I'm interested in your take, because we talk about this a lot on the main show, Paul Security Weekly, and this show. We discuss and argue the merits of education versus experience versus training versus certification. I'm interested in your take on sort of how they all blend together, and how do you measure whether someone's competent enough to do their job or perhaps get a new job. Either the official ISC squared take if you must, but as a psychometrician, I'm kind of interested in how you see the four aspects kind of blending together.
So you probably wouldn't be surprised. I'll give you a very egalitarian answer that we obviously support as many pathways is sensible, right? So we're, educational, education, training, apprenticeship, experience, certification. People who want to be in the profession, people who aspire to be in the profession, they come from different places. They have different opportunities. I mean, when you really think about this globally, right, in terms of what can be done, in some places there's not someone down the street where they can sit at the knee of the master and learn. So I don't think you could put one before the other in terms of maybe what the optimal pathway is, but there is one difference, right, with regard to certification, and I think that. I think why this is so important and why, we're just an example of the larger context. So certification is that demonstration of something, and it's standardized, which is really important. I think gets lost in the mix an awful lot. It's not just a piece of paper. It's not just an onerous process. It's not just expensive. It's certainly, it's worthwhile. So it's all of those things, obviously, but there's standardization and rigor behind it, such that you have a sense of in a degree of impartiality. which doesn't exist in other formats. Access to education is extremely differential from a formal standpoint. Access to mentorship, training, apprenticeship can be very geographically specific or economically specific. Socioeconomically specific, but certification, there are lots of opportunities for people to be able to gain the necessary resources to do it, but there's a standardization component such that it's apples to apples, and that's one reason why certification has become so important across the board. Because as many arguments as are about certification, you do have the same issues with education and other disciplines. So I know it's a really long-winded answer, but there are benefits and detriments.
So it helps me to understand.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, Josh. Just a thought, and then jump back in, Josh. But your description helps me understand why sort of necessarily the bar is necessarily low, which I think is one of my aspects of disdain for certifications in general. Sure. And I look at all of them equally. So I get what you're saying in terms of there needs to be some level of objectivity. And I guess that's maybe the friction that exists in cybersecurity, especially within the hacker community, and I identify as a hacker, that so much of what makes you good at being a hacker or makes you good at being a cybersecurity professional, from one way of looking at it, is the fact that you're looking at things not objectively, that you're that security is very subjective. So that in a lot of aspects. And so the idea of trying to overlay something that's very subjective in nature with something that's objective so that you can measure it just seems like it's always doomed to friction.
Before you answer, let me throw mine in, because it matches up. I mean, I want to point out that if you look, for example, Mr. Jeff has a not a CISSP badge button on today. And as such, I mean, and Jeff, I just want to be clear, this is not looking like a mugshot of you because I took it on the slide. It's just that you always look like a mugshot. No, just kidding. But we have people that take pride in, I'm not a CISSP or whatever, because they believe, rightly or wrongly, that the designation of CISSP does not encapsulate them as a security professional or security researcher or whatever properly. And along with what Jeff was just saying about, there's subjectivity, there's objectivity, I really want to go into, and I think the key is probably the job task analysis, but I want to go into why the certification is not the person, why the certification is not necessarily the job, and why the certification is not the sum total of knowledge. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Boy, that's a question. How will I ever get to the previous one? So, but in the attempt to unravel that very thoughtful series of questions, absolutely. And I think that the natural reaction to perhaps the nonconformist statement of the reaction against certification is the way that it's perceived in terms of being the end all be all is not actually what the intent is. It's not the way that it's designed. That's not the purpose. It's how it gets morphed. And it's like an off-label usage of a pharmaceutical, right? It's the idea is it's approved in a certain way. It's directed in a certain way, but then it gets used for something once it's starting to be effective. And so all of a sudden things get out of control. And I would say that we are very comfortable with what we believe it to be. But to your point, it's an entry point. It's a starting point. It is not the end all be all. It's very much like the world that I live in with accreditation, right? There are accreditation standards for quality to be able to have a quality examination. But if I only lived with those standards, I wouldn't have the best possible examination. I would just have what someone else considered to be a quality examination. Right. You can be from a JTA. It's kind of the validity of you, if you will, of what's being measured, of the construct being measured, is somewhat discrepant by its absence in terms of measurement. What if there was no mechanism to have some level of accounting for what you know and what you have learned? And that is a very tried and true mechanism. Again, I talk about apprenticeships a lot in terms of perhaps something of a bygone era, but it isn't the person. It's a portion of what they know.
Stop right there, because I've been advocating for InfoSec apprenticeships for probably a decade or more, and it's something we would be do.
ISC Squared is as well. Just we are on the same page. We are fans.
What can we do to make it work?
You know what? It's funny. I just walked out of a meeting where we're talking about these things. This is exactly where we're trying to go, because we know everything will be better. Persons, process, technology, everything will be better with that level. With that, one more mechanism like that, and apprenticeships is definitely a part of it. Absolutely.
So, can somebody reach out to you directly? Can somebody reach out to you directly, or how do people get in touch with either you and or ISC Squared for that opportunity?
ISC Squared website, my information is all right there on iscsquared.org. Social media channels all over the place. ISC Squared, any of the information that we have that's available, it'll get to me in particular with regard to that. But absolutely, apprenticeships is a big piece of where we'd like to go. It's part of the ecosystem. To your original question, it's part of the ecosystem. We believe that there's a role for it.
Okay,
but I'm not now and never have been a CISSP. Can I help?
Can you help do what?
With the apprenticeships?
With the apprenticeship.
Yes. So, and I think that's so that it's actually, I'm being a little facetious, but it's a point. So it isn't a closed society, right? That in terms of ISC Squared, what we look to do. But absolutely, that. And so, no, obviously we encourage participation. Thought leadership comes from all over the place, and we actually have. So you might be surprised. ISC Squared as an organization does have fellows that are recognized. Many of them don't hold the credentials that we have. They are recognized for their contributions in the profession. But I mean, obviously, we believe in what we do with CISSP. It is something that works for many people. Back to that question, yes. We do believe it's important for some people. It is the only pathway that some people who don't have experience for the company, that's where they're going to start in terms of trying to gain that credential. Hopefully, that's not going to be the first and only credential they ever have, because we don't think it's sufficient, right? It probably starts way before attempting to get your CISSP. But any routinized pathway, formal learning discipline pathway that would lead towards that is going to be beneficial to the profession.
So what does it cost to become a fellow?
It does not cost anything to become a fellow. You have to be recognized. This is an honor amongst peers.
Yes.
Well,
yes,
but if I never hang out with CISSPs, nobody knows who I am, and why would anybody think to consider me as a fellow?
Not true. I will look into the nomination process. I'll see where your name has come up.
Is it a fair analogy, just based on what you were just saying, to consider the CISSP kind of like a learner's permit?
I think it's a little bit more than that. I think there are other mechanisms in place for lower level certifications that probably aren't quite as demanding. But in terms of what you would expect out of a professional, you're going to need a pretty decent grounding. I think it's how do you characterize, document, and have that as shared information for hiring professionals, right? And I think that there are real business challenges for staffing for qualified persons, and it isn't always going to be, here's my portfolio of what I've done. Who's evaluating that work, right? And I think that there's a little bit more to it. And I think that we're in an environment where the demands of the profession are going to continue to increase. And we don't just need optimized pathways, we need more pathways.
So it's funny that you'd be walking into this right here. I remember way back in the day, sitting for the CISSP while it was still Scantron, and going and sitting in for the test, absolutely cold, no prep whatsoever, and I missed by 11 points. And I'm like, man, you've got to be kidding me. It took me 6 times to pass that test. Now granted, I'm not a good test taker, but
Scott, that's pretty common.
I've never heard that one before, but go on.
But that's why, but Josh, you're right. It is pretty common, and that's why I'm saying this. For those who are listening to this right here and you have a lot of hesitation about the test, you got to push through it and you got to keep going. Now, speaking about the test, Casey, here's where I'm bringing in that question that I was asking during the break. there are a lot of certifications out there now that require you actually showing that you can do the work, right?
Yes.
Where it's a test plus a write-up or a write-up of something, or a way to be able to show that you're not only walking the walk, you're talking the talk, and walk the walk, right? I'm sorry, I got that backwards. What is ISC 2's mission or vision towards providing an actual testing methodology to show that an individual is competent and capable of doing the job? A lot of times when we speak about the CISSP generically, we like to say, well, the body of knowledge is a mile wide but an inch deep, right? So how are we, or how is ISC2 adding practicality measurements into the testing that provides us with these certifications?
First of all, that is an excellent question, and it would be right at home where I live with all of my psychometric and test development friends. This is a common issue. So CISSP, to your point,
I'm guessing it's a small community.
Well, you know what? Yes, but we're all very, very close.
And I have to say, I'm guessing you got beat up a lot as a kid, or you're like an amazing MMA fighter.
No, my sons are, though, and they could dispatch me with alacrity. That's for sure. No, I would probably be somewhere on the former, not the latter. But so with regard to what we're trying to do, so ISC squared, CISSP. So it's a cognitive exam. You answered part of the question initially, is that it's a cognitive-based exam because you look at the breadth and depth and the composition of what is being measured. And remember, from what's on that detailed content outline and what's in the examination blueprint and those domains is but a portion of what's in the common body of knowledge. And the body of knowledge is voluminous, right? That's like it's a description of professional practice. We are taking the most frequent and most important things to be able to measure and test, to be able to get a proxy of what competence looks like. So what are we doing? So the issue is we investigate this all the time. And I would tell you there are realistic and there are scale challenges. When you think about, again, the concept of standardization and what practical exams mean. And I've lived in this world. I've done this before. I've done practical exams. I've done nurse aid exams where there's literally practical. You're sticking an orange with a needle and these types of things, like that level of practical, not just pseudo virtual practical type things. But we are investigating them. We do look at it. To be completely honest, a skills-based assessment and a verification of skills in a practical way is probably not best integrated within CISSP, but it probably stands alongside of it as either an additional piece or an alternate mechanism or something along that line. There are definite efficiency issues when you think about kind of like rich stimuli. The more something approximates reality and the fidelity and vitality of that stimuli being that rich, it takes away how much information per unit of time. And for psychometricians, that tends to be our enemy because of how expensive test timing is, because no one wants to sit for 5, 6, 12, 20-hour examinations. So we are working on it. I don't have great answers to say this is what's next, but we do investigate it to see solutions that will add to the knowledge of the candidate to be able to have a better demonstration of competence.
Well, I've never sat for the CISSP exam because I'm not a CISSP and I don't intend to ever be one. No offense. Is it not just a multiple choice test?
There are other alternate item types that are in there, and I mean, what some people would either consider alternate item types or innovative item types. Prioritization, drag and drops, hotspots, these types of things that look to assess, but they are all closed forms. So in test development literature.
There is that one essay question. Explain how Dr. Casey is amazing. 30 extra points.
Technically, Josh, I hate to do this, but technically you're wrong. There are no essay questions in the CISSP exam. However, there are questions. There are questions about future exams.
Short answer.
No. Oh no, I know it was a joke. I just want to be sure that it's accurately represented. You know,
Right.
for those who don't know, Casey.
But it's a whole different aspect of this. Forget cybersecurity and whether you're measuring success or training or table stakes or whatever. There's this whole element of how people learn, and how do you measure their level of learning and achievement by by taking
or their
tests.
level of retention.
I don't know if it's because if it's all mixed together, it probably is in some weird whatever that word is, psychometricic way that I am horrible at taking multiple choice tests. I fail. I literally fail multiple choice tests.
How do you do in essays and short answers?
Essays I can ace because I can actually say this is what I know or don't know or what I think about a topic. I do much better at I haven't been in college in many years, but I did much better at courses where there were no finite right and wrong answers, but it was more, what's the logic, what's the thought process? Can you work?
Can I dispel a notion for you? However, can I dispel one notion for you?
Please.
So, and I'm not going to argue about your facility with test taking. None of that. Personal preference abounds. Certainly, I'm not sure I would choose essay tests, but I mean that there's always that possibility. But I would say is that there is a difference in closed form items. It isn't always discrete right or wrong. And I can tell you that because this is a test of application, not test of specific knowledge, it's rarely that one of the options is a correct with the other three being wrong. I can tell you, and what makes the exam incredibly challenging, especially for many of the persons who arrive at our doorstep after taking vendor-based certificate exams, name your favorite vendor, Microsoft, right. What happens is it's preference, priority, and applicability given the circumstances. And so, and this is not uncommon from other types of examinations. And these are very fine distinctions, but how often do I get the feedback saying, these are all right? Well, you're absolutely correct. They're all right within a certain context. But if you read the stimuli, it's not exactly true because some are better options than others. And in this case, what's validated is one of these options is significantly better than the others. And so that's a different cognitive level that we're looking to assess.
It's not always, is it the right answer? Is it the most right answer?
Exactly,
number one. Number two, Jeff, you bring up a really good point. And Casey, I want to ask you this directly. I had somebody pop up in a DM who's listening to the show and say, does ISC2 have an option to be able to take the test with a moderator for people with disabilities or those who don't test well? Do you allow that?
So we do have a complete schedule for accommodations.
So there is hope for Jeff.
Accommodations as required by law and beyond. So I'll swap out moderator for reader. So for someone that would suffer from issues where they either cannot read, it could be any type of dyslexia or reading type issue. There could be a traumatic brain injury, which is not a joke. There are a number of different issues why someone needs assistance reading. We would provide a reader with appropriate documentation for these types of, and there's all types of other assistive technologies, whether it be additional time, magnification, input entry choices. There's a number of different mechanisms.
Would that count towards CPEs? Is that so? Let's walk down this path.
That's a great question.
If we have somebody who is already certified that has said, "Hey, I will volunteer my time. I will not only help out with the mentorship program, but I will also volunteer my time to be a disability reader per ISC guidelines." Is that something that somebody who already holds an ISC certification, ISC2 certification, is that something that they can do and get professional credit for it?
It's a great question, Scott.
That is a great question. I don't think so. It's credit. I would say that we're probably not giving CPE credit today for that type of activity, but I would certainly look into it. So not to get too esoteric, but in my role, I'm responsible for SCHEME, which in part of the certification schemes are the requirements for recertification. And so we look at these things all the time. I will take that under advisement. I have that in my notes.
Thank you, sir. we as information security people, especially in our culture, and the way that we do things, we accept everybody, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, orientation, any of that. We accept everybody, which also means that we accept a lot of people that it's not as easy for them as it is for some of us. So, can you call it the Casper guideline?
Well, I can actually speak to some of the things that we're actually doing, and so from a very testing specific piece. So you're talking kind of like on the delivery aspect, but from the test development aspect, I can tell you that we constantly look, as we have to from an accreditation standpoint, but also just from a good organizational practices standpoint, fairness guidelines. There's something called differential item functioning that looks for disparate impact for items and content by individuals. And so we're constantly assessing these things. So to your point of being fair and impartial, we constantly are striving and looking at our own mechanisms to be able to figure out how do we level the playing field and how do we boost that for all individuals who are interested in seeking the credential.
Yeah, that whole rising tide lifts all ships thing. A lot of this, a lot of what you guys do as far as testing and so on and so forth, really help to showcase the talent in the industry. But being able to take what's brand new and coming out of college or learning on their own or coming from a different profession and being able to help and aid those people, I think would really go a long way, because there's really no other certification body that's really paying attention to that. And you can totally correct me if I'm wrong here. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, as an industry, I think we're all striving to do the right things. I think from an industry standpoint, I'm particularly proud that ISC Squared is doing what it's doing and doing all that it can. And then I will say that we do go, we do take great aims. We go beyond maybe what the industry has traditionally done. We are doing more. We continue to do more, to the point of looking to embed opportunity. Before, one of the reasons I didn't quite get back to is, the differentiation between certs and education is that it's blended. How many educational programs, post-secondary programs, the capstone project is getting a certification in addition to other options. You're seeing, the lines are getting blurred all the time, but it's becoming something more. People are having options, and that's what it comes down to.
Right. So the next question that was just thrown at me, is there a way for people that have the ISC2 cert to connect? Right. I know that ISC2 has its own website, but what is the outreach profile into companies and people that already are certified to be able to enable them to connect either on a business level or a friendship level or some other method? We've seen with COVID and the stay-at-home orders, we've lost a lot of interconnectedness. So what is ISC2 doing to try to make that connection and enable conversation?
So I think there's actually so beyond the generic and general, right, of what we have in terms of general outreach for members and what have you. I think there's two particular mechanisms that have grown over the last, and they've in juxtaposition to a point, but ISC Squared does maintain a pretty robust community at iscsquared.org. The community tab that's available there that talks about all types of issues, current security concerns, ISC Squared programs and services, opportunities. But from there's also very specific areas that lead into another effort, and that's our chapters program. So we also, in parts of the world where not every other person you work with is a professional like you. There needs to be different types of opportunities to network, mentor, and grow together. And we have chapter programs all around the world. And again, from the ISC Squared page are opportunities for individuals who want to start chapter programs. And we support them through formal education and formal opportunities through ISC Squared, back to our events, things like that. But there are many times where chapter activities, they're just an opportunity for local professionals to be able to come together to talk about these issues.
Okay, now the last question that I have for you, and this is sort of a big one that's like near and dear to my heart at the very least. unfortunately, information security professionals tend to be lazy bastards. Okay. And we're not always up to speed with making sure that our CPEs are posted up, that our AMF is always paid up. What is the policy for somebody who's had the CISSP for years, didn't get a chance to put in their CPEs, or has missed their AMF? Are you reaching out to them? Are you giving them amnesty in like, hey, you've got so much time before you have to retake the test? What is ISC2's retention policy dealing with that?
Sure, that's an excellent question. Thank you for it, because not enough is known about this. We actually have a number of different mechanisms. We try to be very expedient with this stuff. And do we outreach? We probably reach out more than some people would like in terms of reminders, in terms of notifications of what is necessary. And so, yes, there's an annual maintenance fee requirement. There's an annual CPE contribution. At the end of your 3-year cycle, because our recertification cycles are every 3 years, and on the anniversary of your 3-year, you have to be current at that point in time on CPE and AMFs. If not, there is a 90-day grace period with no penalty. It's just a grace period that we again have an initial set of reminders for individuals saying, now is the time to get current. If you don't, for whatever reason, are not current within that period of time, you will move into within 90 days post your anniversary. They will move into a suspension cycle, which all that means is you are put in suspended animation for a period of time. Everything is on hold. You're not an active CISP or member of that, what have you. But as soon as you fulfill those backwards requirements, you are reinstated. And so that is, and you can hold a suspension status up to 2 years. Okay. After that point in time, all bets are off, and you would have to take an examination again. But we really don't like people to retake examinations. I don't want people to retake examinations.
So the worst thing you can do is call ISC2 and work with somebody to get all of this taken care of, correct?
It is the best thing you can do. And I want to point something out, especially in the area of COVID and everything else. We work with individuals from a hardship standpoint. These are not rigid guidelines. We work with people. We have a number of personnel around the world, military, they're deployed, what have you. They can't do certain things. They have very legitimate reasons. Call ISC Squared, email us. We'll work with you to be able to make sure that you can maintain your current status and get back within requirements when you're able to.
I only have one thing to say to that, and that is, I love it. Keep it up. Don't stop. Keep it up. Keep it up, please. Jeff, Josh, go for it.
You got any parting thoughts, Josh? Otherwise, I will move to wrap us up.
I'm enjoying the psychometrics talk. I'm enjoying the ISC Squared specific talk. I think the apprenticeship was really interesting to me. I really think there's a lot of things that ISC Squared could do to popularize some of these discussions more, and maybe change its image. Hint, hint, you could always come back or bring some friends to the show.
I would love to come back and talk about any of these things related to ISC Squared certifications, what we do, what we don't do. You weren't hard enough on me at all. I would beg for one opportunity.
Have we approached you about your car's extended warranty?
Not yet. I'll ignore that phone call, so don't bother. But I would love.
Yes. Go ahead. I'm sorry. No, please.
No, I'll just say I have one pet peeve, and it's in terms of as how people get to our door. And I don't mean just from an education standpoint, but we really need to talk about the difference between vendor-based certificates of knowledge and professional certifications. So for another day.
Oh, dude, there's so many topics. Unfortunately,
I know.
We literally went a mile wide and an inch deep on this talk.
Yes, we did.
But you know what? I bet in further talks we could do more.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, my goal is to, get representatives from some of the other certifying bodies on and have much the same conversation. Because I'm really, having been outside of the certification program for most of my career, I do have a genuine interest, because I believe that, not everybody came from NSA and started at the dawn of time and invented the wheel. And so, other people need to, have some way to show progress, succeed, excel, or whatever. I am curious about one thing, though, as a final question to you, and I'm really upset that we didn't hit you hard enough. I'm kind of disappointed, but we were trying to be jovial at the same time. But I'm intrigued, and I think all the certification programs are similar in that, you're basically at some point taking an exam, and you have to pass an exam. And I believe that exam is supposed to be a measure of you've achieved some level of education, training, experience, or some combination. So it's a threshold. And I also think it's true that most, if not all, of the certifying bodies, as you were just describing, you don't want to have people take the test again. So it's you rely very heavily on the continuing education process. So I guess my question is, why so much reliance on an exam at the early stages of education and training and experience, but you assume after that stake in the sand that people are getting it and learning it and getting the experience, and all you have to do is say you took a course, you read a blog, you did a this, did a that. There seems to be a disconnect there. Can you comment on that? And
simply because we don't have a week to go through the proper answer to that in terms of all formal educational assessment, but I will tell you, scale and affordability really is what it comes down to. I talk about the standardization piece, affordability, scale. I could give you examples from the allied health professions where the concept of exams were rejected in favor of other mechanisms, or at least given as options, where the other options were rejected in favor of an exam to be able to get to the same level of rigor. So with that, I'll just say that there are mostly operational reasons, but believe it or not, it isn't for the benefit of the organization like ISC Squared. It's also to the mutual benefit of the candidate as well.
So we at SCW have hosts that come on the show all the time, and we think that you've done a pretty good job. Have you A, talked about everything that you wanted to talk about? B, just been here to be able to answer questions? C, no, I'm kidding. I couldn't help that.
Go ahead, test me.
If I have to put a data center in a 7-story building.
What's the fastest way to drop the servers from the 7th floor to the ground?
Yes.
Which one is more likely to assure complete destruction of the data?
17th minute of the first segment with regards to this other.
If I need to put a fence around a data center.
That's a whole separate topic on sort of the science of test taking and proper testing that actually reflects what people know and have achieved.
Hey, Jeff, before we get off the air, Casey, is there anything that you specifically wanted to cover that we didn't get a chance to ask you about, or otherwise?
Besides I think it was versus certify.
Besides that.
And that's just it's one of the issues that I think the industry needs to talk a little bit more about, because they often get confused. But short of that, I mean, the ideas that we spoke about here today, the rigor, kind of like pulling back the veil on what certification is and isn't. I would just reiterate a couple points. Is that at ISC Squared, much like the other organizations that are very similar to us, these things are these certification exams, the items that we put in these exams, how difficult they are, what's on them, not done in the ivory tower. It's done by practitioners, people out in the field, people are involved, different levels of input from different areas. And as I always say, whether it be for things such as the internships or apprenticeships or other types of learning mechanisms, if you want to see something change, get involved. And whether it be from those communities I talked about, whether it be chapters, we're here, we take this stuff in, we actually do change based on what people are looking for. And so we're always looking for it. And if it's very specific exam stuff, I'd love to be able to talk about that. So come to us. We're happy to talk.
All right. Well, Casey, thank you very much for being willing to join us today. That's going to wrap for us this week. Stay safe, stay secure, stay compliant, everyone. We're out.